inside. Is this too loud? Okay. I'm Howard Percival Johnson, Jr. My father was Howard Johnson, and he worked for Edgewood Arsenal during the war. In around February of 1945, they canceled his contract because they had enough munitions, that is bombs and all kinds of other exploding devices, to kill all 6 people in World War II, 6 theaters of war. They calculated that they could kill every one of the enemy. So they closed down my father's portion of Edgewood Arsenal. And so he came home to his wife and said, I guess it's time to have a child. So I came along in 1945, toward the last month, and I called myself a war baby instead of a baby boomer. Well, so when I started out, I went to school and there weren't that many children because the men hadn't come back from the war. So the classes in the school were small, and the teachers liked to find some kids to practice on. Then later, all of a sudden, children started pouring into the schools, and thank goodness the teachers did practice. Well, my parents loved boats, and they started out in 1933 in high school with a canoe. And by the time I came along, every 2 years they would buy another used boat. And you can all move toward the center if you like. Anyway, we went boating on the weekends on the Severn River in the 1950. So they wouldn't take me with them until 1950. I had to show that I was able to swim. And then we had wonderful 2-day weekends of every kind. My father went together with some of the people from Edgewood Arsenal and started a truck repair business in downtown Baltimore. So we would go down there in 1950 and get my father. My mother and I would load the car, go down there, meet him, wait until he could leave, and then we would go down to the boat where I had to pump the bilge. Well, pumping the bilge for a kid, it is a tough job. Plus the pump would leak, so I'd get wet. But my father didn't like any complaints, so I couldn't say anything about the leaky pump. Well, we would go out on the water, and if there was a whirlwind there, my father would go over right away and talk to the whirlwind owner. What happened, so some of the people he knew from Edgewood also tried to build gliders for the government in World War II, but the contract was canceled. The reason was taking men to foreign countries, towing them in gliders behind airplanes was an easy way for them to lose their lives before they could even fight the enemy. So they canceled the glider contract, and these 3 men that my father knew had to change over to building boats. Well, they came up with a method of compressing heated veneer in overlapping patterns using a marine glue that is almost bulletproof under pressure, so that when the boat hull was made, it was rigid and strong all on its own, and yet when it was varnished, the wood was very beautiful. So these boats had no internal structural members to make them heavy. They were light as a feather. And so a small engine would make these boats go so fast that everybody was thrilled by them. After World War II, people didn't have money, and they didn't have a lot of big boat engines. So people would go zooming by my parents' boat in a whirlwind, and my father would wait until he could talk to the guy. So as a kid of 5, I already was looking at whirlwinds out on the river. Well, so it became such an interest for me that I started collecting articles and information about Whirlwind boats and the boats themselves. And correspondingly, my parents taught me to refinish furniture, so I helped them refinish boats as well. And so I have 31 Whirlwinds right now. And it is a wonderful hobby. Well, so what happened was, collecting these articles on Whirlwind boats, I found it was a fascinating story. Again and again, I looked through all these different things and noticed that it was many, many models and styles, and the company was willing to sell you a bare hull, and you could finish the boat yourself, and they would help you. You could buy some of the pieces. So they would help you and advise you on how to build the boat at home with your family. And we have seen many times here a boat where it didn't look like any of the others, and that was because it was a home-built boat. Well, the interesting thing about the hull made out of layers of wood, earlier they talked about dry rot ruining a boat. Whirlwind boats don't really rot because it's only a thin layer of veneer and then a thick layer of glue. And so the glue acts as a barrier. You could lose one layer of your hull, but the rest of it is all still strong. So they're surprisingly resilient, and it's possible to restore some very, very bad-looking boats and still have a beautiful boat when you're done. Well, so my wife is here today. Would you hold your hand up? This is Cheryl Johnson. And I collected so many articles on Whirlwind that I had some boxes full. And not only that, through this Antique and Classic Boat Society, I met someone else who was also deeply interested in Whirlwind boats. And I would go over to Salisbury and meet with him, and we would talk about, and he helped me to write the stuffing box for the Antique and Classic Boat Society for 6 years, and we have quite a few articles we wrote together. Well, his daughter went to college in Texas, and when she married, he decided to move to Texas. So he called me and said, come get all my Whirlwind stuff. Well, so now I had double the amount of articles and other things I had collected. In 2017, I was diagnosed as having to have open heart surgery. So I came home from Johns Hopkins and I had nothing to do, and they said you have to sit around and just focus on recovering from your operation. So I kind of decided, okay, let's look at all this Whirlwind information. And Cheryl, a wonderful patient lady, just helped me organize it into a reasonable story, because there's so many different things about it that it is hard really to grasp all the things that these people did, starting with gliders and also molding the hulls with hot veneer. Only 4 companies in the United States actually molded hulls with hot veneer, and each one of them is very desirable and restorable to this very day. Well, what happened was we put together this book, Wild About Whirlwinds, and so we are proponents of Whirlwind boats and proud to see the beautiful Whirlwinds here at the show. One of them, this fellow Jay Pugh, and our member George restored this boat for him. And also Bob Boardman has a very beautiful one with a dark green upholstery inside. Well, these are boats that are easy to use, easy to maintain. You know, they talk about the expense of storing those boats in the winter. Whirlwind boat, you can put it most anywhere. It's lightweight. They made them in sizes from 12 feet all the way up to a 21-foot cruiser. And so you can, if you have a manageable size boat, 12 or 14 or 16, you can just stick it in a garage or shed or make a covered hut for the boat. And so some of the ones we have that need restoration are stored that way on our property. Well, so these boats are easier to restore than others because there's so few parts, and also because it's easy to sand and easy to varnish, and the varnish looks good. However, I want to caution all of you, if you get to work on a Whirlwind, make sure you don't mix the seats or floorboards with those of another boat, because I have done this. And now I need to figure out which seats and which floorboards go with the 31 boats that we have all around our property. Well, one of the things that happened to me because of going out on the river with my parents in boats every weekend is I have boats in my blood. They all say at the museum here, I have a boat problem. Whether it's one boat or many boats, because to them, boats look like gold. Wow, a boat just looks like fun just by looking at it. It's an amazing sort of thing because the style, the shape, and they're all different. There's no boats here that are the same. Even the Whirlwinds, they're different models, and they're completely different. So we are lucky to be the ones that have come to understand the value of beauty of mahogany wood and the style and design that boats have. And of course, if we had a little calmer weather, maybe more of us would be out on the water zooming around or swimming. So we swam every weekend, and my mother prepared wonderful meals. I got to take my friends on the boats, and so I have 110 antique boats. And my wife and I are hoping to make an online catalog with pictures of all these different boats. None of them are the same. So, and they are part of the history of the United States of America. And they were built all over the nation. And a map of the nation would show dots here and there and everywhere because people love boats in amazing ways. We have someone here where they live near 800 lakes in Minnesota and Wisconsin. It is a surprising thing to see how all around the United States the waterways vary enormously. And we've become friends with someone who lives on the 1,000 Islands. The St. Lawrence River links the ocean to the Great Lakes. And so ships are constantly going by when you're out there with the ACBS group admiring the 1,000 Islands. It's actually 850 islands. And many of them have darling vacation cottages on the islands. I asked my friend up there, what do those people do when they're on their vacation cottage? He said they zoom back and forth to land with their boat. So I want to thank all of you for coming today. Cheryl will put you in touch with us so we can sell you a book if you like that. And we really appreciate telling the story that we know of Whirlwind boats. Many thanks. And grandchildren counted the boats. They're learning to count, so it's a good exercise. And later, we found several more that they didn't notice that we had. So what has happened is over the years, of course, I told you I had boats in my blood. And that's a kind of a peculiar thing where all boats look valuable. And I bought a 7-acre property, and then I was able to make buildings. The property had a 30 by 30 by 90 barn, and that is my workshop. I restored furniture all my life. And in '92, when the founder of ACBS introduced me to our club, I joined and I started restoring more boats. And I got to know a lot of the members of the ACBS group, and they all were enthusiastic. And, you know, you need people like yourself to share the fun and interest that you have in something. And these people are all like that. And so consequently, we've had wonderful shows here at the museum every year. So, and it's even to this year, with all the construction and confusion about where to go and so on and so forth, it is wonderful being here on the water, on the scenic St. Michael's area with all the boats. It's really a pleasure. All right, any other questions?
The manufacturing of whirlwinds locally, could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, okay, so they took veneer and heated it until it was soft enough to bend like spaghetti. And then they had molds. Every single boat that they made had an inner and outer mold. They pulled up to the ceiling, the mold, and turned the heat on in the mold, and then put the layers on with glue. Now, I have pictures of it, but I was never there at the factory. One of the things that happened, oh, I'm sorry. Anyway, multiple layers, all hulls are 5 or 7 layers. And you can see the glue squeezing out in all layers. And they were particular about not allowing any air pockets, because the air pocket, any air pocket would allow a leak to develop. The boats have an outer strake, it's a spray rail that keeps the water from coming in or sliding up the boat, and then it had an inner spray rail, and that's where the seats are connected. So a lot of times it's only like 12 parts, including the deck, that make up the boat. So they're very simple to work on, compared to a Chris Craft boat where there are hundreds of parts. So it is amazing simplification of the design of a boat is what they did. Now, I forgot to tell you this one thing. When I decided to build the book, write the book, I called the founders of, 2 of them were left, and they were close to 92, they were 90. And they said, we knew your father. And I asked them for an interview, and they said, we would love to give you an interview. And so I spent part of a day and had lunch with them, and they told me one story after another. Well, then just 2 years later, the family called and said they've passed away. First one and then another. And as I was driving to the funeral, I decided, look, this is their funeral, this is their loved one. I'll just kind of stay in the background and let them enjoy their family. Well, as soon as I came in, they said, oh, he's here, oh my God. You know, the whole family circled around. They said, if you hadn't written this book, we wouldn't know what our parents did when we were kids. They said they never told us the story of this at all. As soon as they stopped building Whirlwinds in '62, they went on to do other business things. They had the money from building all the Whirlwinds, and they were a success. And so they never told the kids what they did when the kids were small. And so they all had questions. So the whole family got in line, and I talked to every one of them and told them what I knew about what their parents did when they were young. Wow. Isn't that something?
That's true.
So it's been the greatest pleasure imaginable to have the familiarity with this. It started all the way with my father when I was a child.
How long was the company in business? What was the time frame?
It was 1946 to 1962. Yeah.
That's pretty good.
And sales had fallen off, and their interests had changed. Yeah. Go ahead.
When I was growing up, just
Louder. I'm sorry.
I'm sorry.
Louder, I couldn't hear you.
When I was growing up just outside of Boston, there was a Yellow Jacket distributorship in my hometown.
Uh-huh.
Was there any relationship between
No.
Whirlwind and Yellow Jacket?
No. And Roy Rogers, interestingly, owned a portion of the Yellow Jacket manufacturing. They were made in Texas.
Right.
And it was the same molding procedure that they used. And their boats were a little, I thought, a little bit more crudely shaped in the shape of the bow and other things. But they were very successful because they were lightweight, varnished wood, which is always attractive.
Yeah.
And they made quite a few of them, and I see them from time to time. Anybody else? Okay, go ahead.
One thing is, the Whirlwind factory buildings all still exist in Cockeysville, Maryland.
Right.
It's at York Road in Cockeysville, and they're all the roads in the complex, like Veneer Lane. There's a couple other ones which I can't think of. I had a used furniture shop there for about 10 years before I realized it was a Whirlwind factory there. But the buildings still exist, and they're still being used, but not building folks.
That's very interesting. I don't know, I did not know that or research that. Whenever the history of something comes out, it's always nice to look back and see what they did back then. Yeah. So one of my Whirlwind helpers has just arrived, Chuck Warner. Hold your hand up there, Chuck, for a second. Yeah. So whenever we have to move Whirlwinds or do something with them, this fella helps me quite a lot. So I appreciate all of you coming out today.
Thanks.
Many thanks.
Thank you.
Hey, Alex.